This is the generation of them that seek his face. This is the generation of them that seek his face.
Shabbat Shalom. We want to welcome each and every one of you here to Olive Tree Congregation, Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I always have to say Albuquerque because there's several other Olive Tree congregations or Olive Tree fellowships throughout the United States and elsewhere. But we are located here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And for those of you that are coming in through Facebook, you're coming in through our YouTube Torah Unleashed channel. We want to welcome you. And again, today is the secular religious, the Julian Gregorian secular calendar and New Year's Day. I noticed that several people were offering me happy birthday. At some point in time, it went out that January 1st was my birthday, so every year I get January 1st as my birthday. So, thank you for sending me birthday wishes, even though it's not my birthday. We're going to be looking today at the book of Exodus. We're going to start studying Exodus for the next several weeks, but I kind of want to get a little bit back to basics because there's sometimes we get people that join us and there's questions, and if I could answer the question easily, we'll do it. But in the back to basics, understanding Torah, understanding the Torah. And Torah is a way of life. It's a biblical Hebraic way of life. But Torah is also the first 5 books in everybody's Bible. Whatever Bible you have. A lot of people say, well, where do I get a Torah? Do you have a Bible? Well, then you have the Torah. It's the first 5 books of Moses, and they are the foundational. They are the essential faith, teaching, doctrine, theology for Israel and the body of Messiah. These are not just for Israel. The Torah is not just for Israel. It's also for the body of Messiah. The Torah is the basic instruction that the body of Messiah is now called to receive. Israel has received it. Judaism follows a abbreviated Torah, along with they follow a hybrid Torah with Torah and rabbinic writings from other times, post-biblical writings. But we're also called to return to implement, to practice Torah. This is for the body of Messiah. This is not just for Judaism, rabbinic Judaism. This is for everyone who looks at Yeshua as their personal Lord and Savior, using their terms. Now, the Sephir Torah, say with me, Sephir Torah. The Sephir Torah is the scroll of the Torah. We just finished reading our Va'eraI parasha today, and our Torah scrolls are back here, and they're the 5 Sephorim. Say with me, Sephorim. The word Sephorim are books. They're the 5 books of Moses. The scroll of the Torah. It is one scroll, one book in a sense, with 5 sub-books in it. And of course, from the Hebrew, we'll look at first from the Hebrew. The first one is called Breshit. Say with me, Breshit. And this is Genesis. And of course, Breshit in Hebrew means in the beginning. Genesis means beginnings. Say with me, Shmot. Shmot means names. And in the Greek, it is Exodus. Ex is out of, and Odes is way out, the way out of Egypt. Say with me, Vayikra. Vayikra, and he called. And this comes from Leviticus, meaning of Levi in the Greek and English of Levi. Say with me, Bamidbad. Bamidbad, in the wilderness. This is the book of Numbers or countings, because there's census. It begins with a census. Say with me, Devarim, means words. And of course, this is Deuteronomy, or in Greek, Deuteronomy means second law. So all these, as we're going to see, are from the first major word in that book. Now, the Greek ones are from kind of looking at the whole book and kind of getting a little synopsis of the book. Of course, the book of Genesis is the book of beginnings. Exodus is out of Egypt. Leviticus, things pertaining to Levi, sacrifices and all that. Numbers is counting. In fact, this is a historic book, and Deuteronomy is kind of like a synopsis of everything from Exodus to the end of Numbers, as we're going to see. In printed editions, the Hebrew is called the Chumash, and the Greek is called the Pentateuch, both of them meaning five of the five, or a fifth, and the 5 books. This is something that is basic to everybody's understanding from a messianic perspective, that we all need to kind of put this idea of the Torah in our minds. Now, this is the progression of Torah. When people look at Torah, they usually think that it starts in Genesis and it ends in Deuteronomy, and that it's just a straight chronology. And it is not. From Genesis to the end of Numbers is a straight chronology. We start in Genesis, go into Exodus, and then Numbers. And the Torah actually ends in Numbers. But we have the book of Leviticus, which are Levitical laws that take place between Exodus and Numbers. At the end of Exodus and the beginning of Numbers, these laws were formed into one separate book. And then the book of Deuteronomy is actually a parentheses book that gives us an idea of what occurred between Exodus and the end of Numbers. Deuteronomy is actually 3 sermons at the end of the Exodus, and at the end of Moses' life, he gives 3 final sermons over here. And over here, they reach the other side of the Jordan, the plains of Moab, when the Exodus ends. The Exodus actually starts from Egypt and it goes to the end of Numbers. And of course, the book of Deuteronomy is a synopsis of things that occurred over here. And so again, putting in our mind what occurred, when it occurred, gives you a different understanding. Now, there is the public reading of Torah. We've always had Moses. And again, depending on the translation, Moses is told by Adonai to read the Torah every 7 years. Now, the translation says, well, is it once every 7 years? So 70 years, and then 70 years, and then like 14 years later, you read it twice? Or do you read the whole scroll in a 7-year period? And that's the little translation that nobody's really gotten. There are 54 parashot in the Babylonian counting, 153 in the Israeli counting, and the 153 go for 3 years. The 54, which we follow here, is for 1 year, or portions. These are parashot. Say with me, parashot. Every parashot is a portion, and we read a portion like today. I read a portion from the book of Exodus, Parasha Va'eraI. And again, each parsha is subdivided into 7 aliyot. Aliyot means to go up and read. Of course, Yaakov or James in Acts 15, James utters, "For from ancient times Moses has in every city them that preach him, being read in the synagogues every Sabbath day." Now, the early Kehillah, Yeshua practiced this. Paul practiced this. Everywhere Paul went, he always went to the synagogue on Shabbat. And the early Kehillah, the early congregation of Messianic believers, practiced going to a synagogue, whether it was the ancient synagogues of Second Temple period times, or like when James, if you read the book of James, the book of Yaakov, same Yaakov here, says when someone comes into your synagogue, he was talking to, in the book of James, talking to the believers. If someone comes to your synagogue and he's nicely dressed, don't say, "Oh, stand here in the best place." And if a poor man comes, don't tell him, "Oh, go sit over there in the floor." He says, when someone comes into your synagogue, which means that still in the early body of Messianic faith in the time of the apostles, the place that they gathered was called the synagogue, which means a gathering place. And so this is a synagogue. This is a gathering place. We gather here, and one of the main ideas that we gather here for is to study Torah. The titles in the books of the scripture, it is not known when the scrolls were called Breshit, Shemot. We know that the Septuagint was the first to actually start using the titles of Genesis and Exodus. Maimonides is the first one to standardize in the Middle Ages the labeling, the present form. So the present parasha forms, the 53 or 54 parashot, are from Maimonides. Now, one thing you will see here is that I will modify or adjust the parashot to fit the flow of the story, to fit the narratives. And today is a good example of this. Sometimes the parasha fits perfectly with the narratives, the paragraphs, the chapter divisions, but sometimes it doesn't. In fact, today, it actually, Parasha Va'eraI actually begins in verse 2. Why didn't the chapter and verses were done, by the way, in the Middle Ages by Christians. It was Christians and in the Middle Ages who actually came up with chapter verses, but they didn't mesh them with what Rabbinic Judaism already had. They did their own idea. And so we have sometimes where the chapters and verses don't mesh. And we'll look at that in just a little while. Now, Sephir Shemot. Say with me, Sephir Shemot. The word Sephir means the book. So the book of Shemot is the book of Exodus. The book of Exodus in Hebrew is Sephir Shemot. And this is the central book of the Torah. Shemot is the central book from Adam through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob through Joseph. It kind of leads us up to it. And then we have Moses and the Exodus event, the Sinai event, and then from there it goes down in a sense. So it is the central book because it presents the giving of the covenant. The Sinai event, going to Sinai, going to this mountain is the result of the redemption of Israel from Egyptian bondage by the blood of the Passover lamb. Now, the Sinai event, the giving of the covenant, what we call the 10 Commandments, these two stones, and by the way, the 2 stone tablets were written on both sides, and one was Yahweh's copy, and one was the copy of Israel. In ancient, what's called suzerainty treaties, when a covenant was given, like today, party of the first part has the same as the party of the second part. And the party of the first part signs both of them, party of the second part signs both of them, and each keep their copies. And that's what the 2 tablets of the stone were. One was Yahweh's copy, and the other one was a copy of Israel, in a sense. And one of the most important things that we need to start looking and putting in the back of our minds is the idea that the Torah doesn't save. The Torah was not given as a salvation feature of mankind. It is the Passover event. That was the redemption of Israel. Israel is not redeemed by receiving the Torah or the covenant or by following it. Let me say that again. Israel is not saved by receiving the Torah, and especially the covenant, 10 Commandments, or by following it. We are saved by grace through faith. We're going to start looking in the next few weeks into the Passover and the whole aspect of the Exodus. And one of the most important things I want to really stress this is that Adonai looked upon Israel through Abraham as the seed of Israel, and Isaac and Yaakov, and the 12 sons that come, and then in the 400 years in Egypt, they become really a nation. They become a people, the Hebrew people, they become a unified group. But they were humans just like we are. And Adonai looked upon them, and he chose them, as we're going to see. The choosing takes place, as we're going to see. And he chooses them not because they were great, not because of anything positive. He chose them by his mercy and his grace so that they could be the people that would bring the way of Yahweh to the world. They were not chosen for themselves, but they were chosen for a purpose. And that purpose was to bring the salvation to the world through the Word, and most importantly, through the Messiah, who Adonai had preordained that he would die from the foundations of the world, that he would be the sacrificial lamb that would save the world from their guilt, from their shame, from their sin. And so the Sinai event, this great event, is not to be looked upon as, if you follow some of the rabbinical teachings, you will look upon Sinai from a perspective of salvation. But no, this is not a salvation event. This is the result of the redemption, the salvation event. It was in Goshen, when we're going to see next week, when Adonai tells Moses to choose a lamb, and by faith they were to choose a lamb, and by faith they were to slay this lamb. By faith they were to put the blood of this lamb on the lintel and doorposts of the house. Adonai gave the lamb. Israel took the lamb. By grace he gave the lamb. By faith, they took the lamb. And when they took the lamb from Adonai and did the faith act of putting blood, that brought the redemption of the firstborn, and that allowed Israel to leave Egypt as a redeemed people. But Adonai took Israel to Sinai. A saved, redeemed people was taken to Sinai. And the Sinai event, the giving of the covenant, says a saved people lives like this. It doesn't say to be saved, you got to do this. It doesn't say to be saved, you got to do this. You got to follow this to be saved. It says a saved people, a redeemed people, follows this way of life. And I want everyone to follow this way of life, not to save you. It's not a salvation gimmick, trick to get you in. A lot of people use it. We call that works righteousness. When someone uses something of religion, it doesn't even have to be Jewish, Christian. It could be any religion. When they use that religion to get closer to God, get closer to spirituality or whatever they want to call it. No, we cannot use anything. It's because we've been redeemed. It's because of what Yeshua did for me that now I want to live the life that he has for me. And that life begins in the foundational understanding of Torah. We follow Torah because he has redeemed us. We are a redeemed people. And Israel should have followed Torah because they were redeemed. In fact, later on it became, and it still is today, with many people, even in Christendom, it has become a way to be saved. Do this, and you'll make, and I'll use their term, you'll make God happy. Do this, and you will appease God. Do this, and all these pile up at works. Well, it's by grace that we're saved, through faith, not by works. We can't boast. We can't say, I saved myself. No, it's not because of what we did. You know, and when there's a lot of funerals, sometimes people say, oh, he was a good man. He's in there because he was a good man. No, he's not in there because he was a good man. The only way that gets us into eternity is through the doorway of Yeshua. And what he did, he was the good man that did it and wants us to follow because we are a redeemed people. So the Sinai event is the result. He took us to Sinai as a result of what he did for us. And this doesn't only apply to Israel, the Hebrew people. This applies to the body of Messiah also. To whosoever will, this would apply. Because Elohim so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. When we look at Shemot, the way out, there are 11 parashot. So we're going to be studying 11 parashot from Genesis 1, from Shemot 1:1, Exodus 1:1, to Purukai, Exodus 40, verse 38. These are the parashot. Last week was Shemot, and this is Va'eraI. Next week is Bo. Now, like I said, I don't follow the parashot strictly. I follow the parashot in kind of a modified way because there are aspects like today Va'eraI and next week's Bo talks about the judgments. And I say to myself, I wonder what was in Maimonides' thinking when he did the parashot divisions. Why does he break in the middle? Sometimes he breaks even in the middle of a verse. And I don't know what the Middle Age. He lived in the Middle Ages. I don't know what their mind was, how to do things, but he didn't consult me. So I do what's called a modified parashot, modified. So today we're going to look at some of Shmot and some of Va'eraI, and next week we're going to look at some of Va'eraI and some of Bo. So we're going to be doing some of that little by little. Shmot, the events of Shmot cover from Israel in Egypt. When they come in Egypt, remember, there was 70 that came. The names of the sons, Joseph was in Egypt, and so it covers to his death, to the completion of the Mishkan. So in the book of Shmot, the book of Exodus, we start with Israel in Egypt. 200 years go by, and then the Moses event, the Exodus event, now covers the time from leaving Egypt to the arrival at the plains of Moab. So there is a lapse there. Today we're going to look at two parashot, Shmot and Va'eraI. Again, not completely, but parts of them. This is Parsha Shmot. This is Parsha Va'eraI. Shmot has 18, and Parsha Va'eraI has 10. And notice that Parsha Va'eraI ends in the 7th plague. Bo begins with the 8th plague. And so I'm going to cut and paste as I see more logical, more standardized actual paragraph cuttings. Of course, here is last week's parasha, Shmot. These are all the things that are there. And this is today's. We begin with Moses was born in around the year 5026 before the Common Era, during the reign of Tutmosis the first. And so Tutmosis the first was the Pharaoh of the birth. Pharaoh's daughter was Hatshepsut. So if you want to study about life of Moses, that is Hatshepsut. She was 15 years old at the time when she found Moses, and there in the reeds, and her name was Hatshepsut. Again, Pharaoh's daughter, and the Pharaoh was Tutmosis the first. Now, this is what we call the conservative chronology. And we're going to look at the Pharaoh of the Exodus. And if you have seen the movie The Ten Commandments by Cecil B. DeMille, if you have seen that, it's totally different pharaohs because they follow a very liberal, very short chronology, almost 2,000 years, 1,000 years difference from them. And so this is the chronology that we follow here. The first 40 years of Moses' life were spent in Egypt, if you remember, learning from Pharaoh and the skills that he needed to help run Egypt. Moses was a prince, and he grew up as a prince there. Now, when he was 40 years old, now this is interesting. A lot of people don't realize this because the movies of Moses don't bring this out. You have to actually read the Torah. You have to read the text to look at this. again, when you see the movies, you think that Moses spent all the time in Egypt. No, Moses grew up probably up to 2 years old with his real mother and father. Remember, Miriam was called to go find a nurse for him, and who was the nurse? His real mother. And he spent at least 2 years, which means that not only did he learn Egyptian because they knew, but he also learned Hebrew in those first 2 years. And then he goes to live with Pharaoh's daughter as his son, and as her son, and in the palace. But he always knew he was a Hebrew. This idea of him not knowing is foreign. It's Cecil B. DeMille. He knew he was a Hebrew. And he goes to visit the Hebrews, his family. He goes to visit them. And there he sees Egyptian killing a Hebrew. And, of course, he kills the Egyptian. And he flees from Pharaoh. And he goes to the land of Midian. And, of course, there he marries Sephir. Together they had 2 sons. And then Moses spent the next 40 years working as a shepherd. So he spent 40 years in Egypt and then 40 years in the wilderness. 40 years as a son of Pharaoh's daughter and 40 years as a married man and a shepherd. So the first 80 years of Moses' life until he receives the call. And let's go to Exodus. And let's go to Exodus, and we'll look at here. Go with me to Exodus chapter 3. Moses was looking after the flock of Yitro or Jethro, the father-in-law, priest of Midian. He led the flock to the far side of the wilderness, and he came to Horeb, the mountain of Elohim. There the angel of Yahweh appeared to him in the shape of a flame of fire, coming from the middle of a bush. And Moses looked, and there was the bush blazing, but it was not being burnt up. And so there was an actual bush, and this was a real bush. But in the midst, look what it carefully says, carefully read that. In the midst of the bush, there was a flame of fire. The bush wasn't burning. It was not a burning bush, really. It was a burning fire in the midst of the bush. And he goes to look about that, and because it wasn't being burned up. And now Yahweh, in verse 4, saw him go forward to look, and Elohim called to him from the middle of the bush, Moshe, Moshe, Hineni, here I am. He answered, come no near. He said, take off your shoes, for the place on which you stand is holy ground. I am the Elohim of your father, he said, the Elohim of Abraham, the Elohim of Isaac, and the Elohim of Yaakov. At this, Moshe covered his face, afraid to look at Elohim. And so he sees this flame. Now this is Yahweh, but always remember, all the apparitions of Yahweh, of Elohim, in Scripture are the pre-incarnate Yeshua, the Word of Elohim. So this is the pre-incarnate before his incarnation, before taking flesh, of the Word, the eternal Word of Elohim. And the Word of Elohim speaks. Remember, the Word of Elohim, the pre-incarnate Yeshua, is Elohim. So when he speaks, the Word speaks, and here we have the revelation of the presence of Yahweh. But again, it is the Word who would later on be made flesh and dwell among us, tabernacle among us, that is speaking. And he says this is holy ground. And then he gives him the mission. He gives Moshe the mission to go to Pharaoh. The messenger of Yahweh is Elohim. And then he tells him there, I send you to Pharaoh. Now, this Pharaoh, remember, Tutmosis the first was the Pharaoh of his birth. Now the grandson, Tutmosis the third, is the Pharaoh of the Exodus. And this is when he lived. And this is the Pharaoh that Moses is called to go before. I send you to Pharaoh, he says there in verse 10. And so there he starts talking, who am I to go to Pharaoh and bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt? The mission is to Exodus, to bring out Israel out of Egypt. Now, first it entailed just a 3-day journey, but Adonai had other plans in mind, as we will see in the next few weeks. And he tells him there. Now, go with me to verse 13. Verse 13, when he says, I send you, here he has an apparition. A bush that seems to be burning, but the bush doesn't burn, but there's a fire in the midst. This is Yahweh, this is Elohim. But in verse 13, to kind of seal the mission, is we have the revelation of the divine name. Then Moses said to Elohim, I am to go then to the sons of Israel and say to them, the Elohim of your fathers has sent me to you? So he's asking this as a question to Elohim. But if they ask me what his name is, what am I to tell them? If I ask him, if I tell him, Elohim, the mighty one, because remember, the Egyptians had all kinds of Elohim. They had all kinds of gods. All the countries in the world at that time, they knew about all the gods. Everybody had gods. There was gods and lords in plenty in the ancient world. Which God? Who are you? What is your name? Who do I tell them sent me? And then here Adonai says in verse 14, and Elohim said, I am who I am. Chaya asher chaya. I is who I is. I am. Chaya asher chaya. I am who I am. This, he added, is what you are saying to them. Chaya has sent me to you. I am has sent me to you. Then Elohim said to Moses, you are saying to the sons of Israel, Yahweh, the Elohim of your fathers, the Elohim of Abraham, the Elohim of Isaac, and the Elohim of Yaakov has sent me to you. This is my name, Shmi, Zeh Shmi, for all time. By this name I shall be invoked for all generations to come. Chaya is a verb, I am. First person chaya, the to be verb. I am who I am. The one who is has sent me to you. And that is the same Elohim as the Elohim of Abraham, the Elohim of Yaakov, the Elohim of Isaac, the Elohim of your fathers. Now, when we got to this point last year, I spent the whole teaching, the rest of the time on this verse. If you would like to do that, go to our YouTube channel, and I give a very big exposition on why the name is Yahweh. And so on Shmot of 2021, Shmot 2021, you'll find my teaching on why I use Yahweh, why I don't use Yehovah, and why Yehovah is a name that should not be used. And I know many of you Messianic congregation, Messianic rabbis are using Yehovah, following Nehemiah Gordon and some other people that are using Yehovah. But I would caution you, before you really start using it, don't just take the word of those that are not spirit-filled, but that you might do a careful study. And please look at that study that I did last year. Plus, those of you that are here, we often take that study and use it on the board. And so one of the most important things that we want to make sure is that we use the name that is the correct name, and not one that is a hybrid name. Yehovah or Jehovah is a hybrid name. It's not a biblical name. Doesn't have the consonants of Yod He Vav He with the vowels of Adonai, and they've been put together to form the hybrid name Yehovah or Jehovah in King James English. But he says, you are to say to the sons of Israel, Yahweh, Yahweh or Yahweh. The V and the W are interchangeable in many languages. So you could say Yahweh or Yahweh. That doesn't make a difference there. He is the Elohim of Israel, Yahweh. Now, I would encourage you not to use the word Yahweh. We encourage people to use Adonai, Elohim, unless you're reading Scripture. Notice that when I read the Torah scrolls, I use Yahweh. When I read Scripture, I read what I see in the Hebrew. When you are praying, you could use Yahweh. And when you are teaching, as I'm teaching now. But besides that, I will always use, especially outside with outsiders, I will always use Adonai or Elohim to keep the name holy and sacred. But as we're going to see when we go into the commandments, he says, you shall not take the name of Yahweh your Elohim in vain, in a vanity manner. It doesn't say don't use it. It says don't use it in a way that would bring dishonor, blasphemy to the name. And so what we have here is what is the name. And so this is the way we would pronounce it here. Yod He Vav He, or Yod He Wah He, Yahweh or Yahweh. But this is the way it is. And again, last year I brought out a whole Hebrew grammatical teaching, so please look at that if you want to learn more about that. Now, go with me to Exodus 6:6. Exodus 6:6, and into the Va'eraI passage. Again, I don't know why people have, we've added stuff. 2 plus 2 should be 4. 2 plus 2 should not be 5. It should not be 3. 2 plus 2 should always be 4. But yet, so many times we get scripture, and not only Judaism does that, Christianity does this too. In fact, the whole Christian holiday system and all kinds of other ritual systems are getting scripture and coming up with a whole different interpretation. But go with me to Exodus 6:6. And actually, let us go ahead and begin with verse. Let's begin with verse 2. Elohim spoke to Moshe, and he said to him, Ani Yahweh. This was our parsha today. Ani Yahweh. To Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov, I appeared as El Shaddai. Did I also not make myself known to them by my name Yahweh? Also I made my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land that they lived in as strangers. And I have heard the groaning of the sons of Israel, enslaved by the Egyptians, and I have remembered my covenant. He says, I have remembered my covenant. Now, what covenant did he remember? Go with me to the book of Genesis. And here in the book of Genesis, chapter 15, Adonai makes a covenant with our father Abraham. And there in verse 15, verse 1, chapter 15, verse 1, it happened sometime later that the word of Yahweh was spoken to Abraham in a vision. Have no fear, Abraham. I am your shield. I am your magen. Your reward will be great. Adonai Yahweh, my sovereign Yahweh, Abraham replied, what do you do and what do you intend to give me? I go childless. So remember, he's been praying for a son. He goes childless. And then he says that your heir, not someone else's, not your servant, but your heir, will, your own flesh and blood. Verse 4 will be your heir there. And look up to heaven. Count the stars. Your descendants will be like that. Abraham put his faith in Yahweh, who counted this as making him justified. Now please underline that verse, put it in brackets in yellow. Abraham put his faith in Yahweh, and this was considered as justifying him. Abraham was not justified by any work he did. He was justified by faith, by believing the word of Yahweh. And when he believed his word, Adonai decides to make a covenant with him. And so he tells him to get a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, a young pigeon, and to sacrifice them and put them in halves and to walk through them. Now, this is, again, a covenant And a covenant is always with blood. A covenant is not with a signature. A covenant is with blood. You have to give blood. And the blood that you would always give was always a vicarious sacrifice. The word vicarious means that you're performing the sacrifice, but somebody else dies. A covenant is not where you die or you put your own blood. You use the blood of a victim, innocent blood, blood that is incapable of committing sin, and you use that blood as a vicarious substitute. And so the blood of these animals was a substitute. And the two parties would walk in between that covenant, and blood, of course, would get in their sandals, blood would get in between their toes, blood would get in the hem of their garments, and that stain would be like the signature. It would be a signature of blood. And so Abraham does this, and he gets ready to do a covenant with Yahweh, but all of a sudden Yahweh puts him to sleep. Yahweh puts him to sleep. And when he puts him to sleep, all of a sudden, watch what it says here. Verse 12, now as the sun was setting, Abraham fell into a deep sleep, and terror seized him. Then Yahweh said to Abraham, know this for certain, your descendants will be exiled in a land not their own. And when they have been slaves and oppressed for 400 years, but I will pass judgment also on the nation that enslaves them. And after they leave with many, they will leave with many possessions. For your age, you in the fourth generation, they will come back, for the wickedness of the Amorites is not ended. And so here in this covenant, Adonai does several things. Notice that Adonai predicts the Egyptian bondage. For 400 years, you're going to be enslaved. But in the fourth generation, you will come out. And you will come out with many possessions. And so it wasn't Pharaoh who enslaved Israel. It wasn't Pharaoh who thought that up. It was Adonai who allowed it. 400 years later, Adonai says to Abraham, your descendants, they're going to be enslaved for 400 years. And in the fourth generation, I will bring them out. Now remember, Abraham is asleep. Adonai is speaking to his heart, to his spirit. Abraham is asleep, doesn't know all this. Now when the sun had set, verse 17, and darkness had fallen, there appeared a smoking furnace and a firebrand that went between the halves. That day Yahweh made a covenant with Abraham in these terms. To your descendants I give this land, from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. And so Adonai makes a covenant with Abraham, a covenant for the land, this land of Canaan, and all the lands from the Wadi of Egypt to the river Euphrates. That means to present-day Iraq, Kuwait, all that land, Syria, Lebanon, all that land belongs to Israel. Jordan, all that land belongs to Israel. Adonai made a covenant, and you're going to go in, and I am going to exodus you out. I'm going to bring you out. So the Exodus was predicted 400 years before. Let's go back to Va'eraI here. on Exodus 6. I also made my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land where they lived as strangers. And I have heard the groaning, this 400 years later, of the sons of Israel enslaved by the Egyptians. And I have remembered my covenant. Say then to them, to the sons of Israel, Ani Yahweh, I am Yahweh. I will free you of the burdens of the Egyptians that they've laid on you. I will release you from slavery to them. And with my arm outstretched and with my strokes of power, I will deliver you. I will adopt you as my own people, and I will be your Elohim. Then you will know that it is I, Yahweh, your Elohim, who have freed you from the Egyptians and their burdens. Then I will bring you to the land I swore that I would give to Abraham, to Isaac, to Yaakov, and give it to you for your own. I, Yahweh, will do this. This land of Israel does not belong to any people today. It belongs to Elohim forever, and he has given it to Israel. That land, which was Canaan, belongs to Israel. And nobody better try to take it away. Every nation that has ever tried is in the ash heaps of history. And they will continue to be so. And Israel will continue to live. Where are those mighty nations that have attacked Israel in the past? Where is Babylon? Where is Assyria? Where are the Syrians? Where are the Pharaohs? Where is mighty Rome? Where are the Greeks? Where's the Third Reich? Where are all these people? They're gone, and they will be goners, whoever tries it again. That's why we need to pray for the peace of Jerusalem and seek Jerusalem's peace. Bless Israel, not so much as a state nation, although we do support the state of Israel, but the people of Israel and the idea of what is the real Israel. Who is the olive tree of Israel? Who are they? But there are four things here. I shall free you from the forced labor of the Egyptians. I shall rescue you from their slavery. I shall redeem you with outstretched arms and mighty arms of judgment. I shall take you as my people, and I will be your Elohim. And of course, he's going to lead them into the country which I swore. These have become synonymous today with the four cups. The modern Passover meal, the Seder, is built on a platform of four cups of wine. The Haggadah is built on this idea that there's 4 cups of wine. And of course, the 4 cups of wine are from I will free you, I will rescue you, I will redeem you, and I will take you. And of course, today, they've added a 5th cup, I will lead you. But the 4 cups of wine are what has traditionally been called the first cup, the cup of sanctification, where the Passover supper begins with a cup of wine, sanctifying, setting apart this night and this service. it comes with a second cup, the cup of judgment, remembering all the judgments of Adonai against the Egyptians. And then the third cup, the cup of redemption. And the fourth cup, the closing cup, the cup of praise. Now, it is the third cup that we believe Yeshua took, and this is the cup that he said, this is the cup of the new covenant. Now, in 2 weeks, we're going to really spend the whole Shabbat service on Pesach, on Passover. And so I will look upon that later on. But one thing I want to do here also is kind of gives you a bird's eye view, give you a bird's eye view. Now remember, here's Canaan. Here's Canaan. Here's the modern state of Israel today. Here's the Mediterranean Sea. It was a cloudy day. This is a satellite photo. By the way, you see how this is? Did you guys know that the earth was round? There's a lot of people who think that the earth is flat. From the satellite, the earth is round. Well, anyways, here is the Sinai Peninsula. Here is the Midian, of course, Egypt. The Red Sea goes down, and it has two arms. This today is called the Gulf of Aqaba. This is called the Suez, Gulf of Suez. And today the modern Suez Canal goes through there. Here is the Nile Delta. Here is Goshen. Cairo and Memphis and those cities are right here. But here's the Delta, very green from all the water. Now, Abraham was the first one to travel from here to here and back. And of course, when they sold Joseph, they sold him here. And it goes by camel over here. And of course, Jacob, back and forth. This was the way of the sea to go back and forth. I've driven from Gaza here to Cairo, and it took us. We left in the morning about 6 o'clock and got to Cairo when the sun was setting. So in one day you could drive this. In those days it would take months to follow the caravan routes. But Israel was here living in the Delta. It is here that Joseph died. In fact, Joseph's house and tomb are right here. And of course, this is the traditional route of the Exodus. There's other people that have the Exodus and the mountain of Moses right here, Sinai right here. This is the traditional Sinai. And of course, there's a Sinai here. There's a Sinai someplace over here and even one over here. There are 4 Sinai places. But this gives you a bird's eye view of what we're going to be looking at for the next several weeks as we start talking about the Exodus. Now, the Exodus event is for us of vital importance, especially as Messianic believers. Because in Christianity, we don't look upon the Exodus event or the Sinai event, the covenant, the giving of the covenant, as a major part. In fact, a lot of Christianity has said, all that is obsolete. In fact, the term Old Testament and New Testament are terms that were used by Marcion to say that the first covenant, the covenant of Sinai, is obsolete. The 10 Commandments are obsolete, and the Old Testament is obsolete. Now, the reason he got that is because a testament, like a last will and testament, we make last wills and testament. And when we pass away, this is going to be given to the descendants or the spouse or whatever. Well, what Marcion did, and he was a priest, and what he did is he wanted nothing to do with the Jews, with what he called the law. So he said the law is obsolete. And so what he said, he put it in legal terms, as the last will and testament, for example. If you are married to a spouse, you have a wife, and you are very much in love with her, and so you signed everything to her. When I die, my cars, my stocks, my bonds, my properties, everything goes to you. That's a last will and testament. But if for some reason you divorce that person and you marry another person, the will that you put to this person is obsolete because it's been superseded by a new last will and covenant. So when you die, your first wife can't say, well, here I have the last will and testament, it's mine. No, because that is old now. That's obsolete. It's been superseded by the new. So Marcion got this into his mind. He got into his mind that the new covenant, when Yeshua raised the cup and says, this is the cup of the new covenant, he was looking not at biblical covenants, the cutting, giving of the blood, but he was looking at legal terms from the Latin world, from the Greco-Roman Latin world of last will and testaments. And so he said, well, when Yeshua said this, the first covenant was obsolete and makes it old. And so at that point, Christianity took on a left turn, a wrong turn. And they started looking at Old Testament, New Testament. And so the New Testament in Christianity is the major part. The Old Testament, well, those are good stories. Those are, the Psalms really give me hope. And, oh, look at, I wish I could be like Daniel. Or, they give inspiration. But they're not to be believed, lived. They're just for inspirational purposes. No, that's not what we believe in. That's not what we're going to see in the next several weeks. I want to present to you a way of receiving in the Exodus story, in the Sinai covenant, that Sinai and the Exodus belongs to the body of Messiah just as it belongs to every Hebrew. In fact, we want to present that the Hebrews need to look at the Sinai covenant from a messianic apostolic view, and the messianics and the believers, the Christians, need to look at it from a Mosaic point of view. We all need to go back and look at both and say, I could learn about the Sinai event, the giving of the covenant, from Messiah Yeshua, from the apostles, from Paul, from Peter. Just like every rabbinic Jew could look and say, you know what? There's so much in what I've been taught, but I haven't been taught the full teaching. You see, Judaism hasn't taught the full teaching. Christianity hasn't taught the full teaching. Both of them need to look and see it in the true fullness. And that's my vision. I want to do that. We need to look at the Exodus as the power of Yahweh against the gods of this world. The power of Yahweh against the gods of Egypt. The power of Yahweh against every god. The power of Yahweh in the name of Yeshua against every sickness, against every disease. against all the torments and all the things that come against us. The Exodus is the greatest show of force that Adonai has done to give us his word, as the cross and the resurrection are Yahweh's greatest show of force for the salvation of the world. Without the Exodus, we can't have the cross and the resurrection. The Exodus is the foundational. It's what gives us that idea that Adonai wants to covenant with you. This is the way he wants you to live. Not for salvation, like we said, but because of salvation. This is the way he wants us to live. He showed his power with outstretched arm. But one thing that the Exodus and the Torah and the Ten Commandments also do is they show our flaw. They show our flaw. The giving of the Torah. When we put a mirror between me and Torah, guess what? I don't measure up. Do we measure up? Do you measure up? Does the world measure up? No, none of us measures up. I don't measure up. The mirror of Torah says you are a sinner. But it also shows me, and we're going to see from Torah, Torah shows us through the sacrificial system that only blood will atone for life. Only blood will atone for life. But it can't be your own blood, because your own blood is tinted. It needs to be the blood from the sacrificial system. We're going to learn, especially in Leviticus, is that the blood has to be sinless. But it's not with the blood of bulls and goats, which are symbolic, but it's with the blood of Yeshua. The Passover, our Passover lamb that was sacrificed. We're going to see that what the Exodus event does, the Sinai covenant does, it shows us our sinfulness, our hopelessness, and our need for a vicarious sacrifice, which is only in the blood of Yeshua. Yeshua is written throughout the Torah. Yeshua is written throughout the Exodus. We saw today where Moses meets Yeshua. Not only did we see a couple of weeks ago where Abraham meets Yeshua, talks with Yeshua, but Moses meets Yeshua in his pre-incarnate form in the burning bush, and throughout the Exodus, all the way to the crossing in the end. Let's go ahead and stand. Father, I thank you for the opportunity that you've given us to throw some things out that we could go back home now and study, where we could think about. Father, as we get ready for Passover now in March, April, every time we have the beginning of the secular year, Father, I start preparing for Passover. My mind starts going now for Passover and the events that brought about Passover. The Exodus, Father, the Sinai covenant, everything that you give to us. So as we start preparing now for Passover, start beginning to look at the biblical New Year, the biblical Rosh Hashanah, Aviv 1, Father. As we start looking at that your Ruach HaKodesh might allow us to put our hearts, our minds, our lives. Back in the focus, Father, of how you want us to live. This coming year, Father, I want to live closer to you. This coming year, Father, that's coming, I want to live holier, more set apart. We want to bring more people into the kingdom. We want to bring people back that have left your kingdom, that are backslidden, and give you honor and glory. Yevarechecha Yahweh va'ish merecha. Ayir Yahweh panav elecha vichunecha. Asa Yahweh panav elecha vayasem lecha. Shalom. May Yahweh bless you and keep you. May Yahweh make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May Yahweh lift up the light of his countenance upon you and give you his peace. Shalom, shalom. Have a good week. Thank you. Shalom, shalom. Welcome to Olive Tree Fellowship and Torah Unleashed Ministries. Thank you for joining us on our channel. If you have enjoyed this teaching and would like to see more, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to click the notification bell so that you can be notified when we have new videos. If you would like to support Olive Tree Fellowship and Torah Unleashed Ministries, please visit us at olivetreefellowship.com or TorahUnleashed.org. We thank you for your past support and hope to continue with you. Shalom, shalom. Have a good day. Shalom, shalom y bienvenidos a Olive Tree y a la Torah desatada. Les doy gracias a ustedes y a Adonai por su apoyo que nos han dado aquí. Y si quieren continuar a hacer una donación, pueden ir aquí en TorahUnleashed.org o en olivetreefellowship.com y ahí pueden dar una donación. Su apoyo, su ayuda es importante en estos días. Shalom, shalom.